join to talk about the FS-02 competition. The stage of the competition that you're in, of course, is the oral and written exam. So we have been waiting for people to join. People will continue to join as we're talking. I'm just looking in the chat for, there was a question there. Okay. Oh, hello, Lynn. So Lynn has a question. She's asked, like to confirm that you can log in and present your written exam and re-log in for the interview at a later time if you want to do this in 2 separate time schedules. So far as I understand, that's correct, but I would very much encourage you to write to HR and confirm that that's so, exactly how that works. Because it says in your confirmation letter that you can do the written portion separately from the oral portion. I don't know how that works. I don't know how they separate those two things, but they've said that in your confirmation letter. So I would strongly suggest that you, if you really are concerned about this, write to them and get them to clarify exactly what that means and how it works.
I will. CJ, thank you for your response. My strategy was, if I do the written exam in advance, I could technically identify a few competencies that they already evaluated and maybe prepare better for my interview.
Precisely so, exactly so. That's why I've written to HR and I've asked them 2 things. One, I've asked them what are the definitions of the competencies that are being assessed and where those definitions sit. And I'm waiting for an answer. And I might not get one because I'm not in the competition. So technically, I don't think I'm really entitled to an answer. But the second question I asked is, can you confirm which competencies are being assessed orally and which ones are being assessed in writing? What I would guess is that the ones that are listed above ability to communicate orally are the ones that are being tested orally. And the ones that are listed above ability to communicate in writing are the ones that are being tested in writing. That would be my guess, but I don't know. I don't work in HR. Go ahead, Hope.
Hi, sorry, I'm using my phone.
Thomas.
Yeah, hi, it's Thomas. I received this link through someone within GAC, so I'm not sure if it reached everyone who's not in GAC, but anyway, that's not my question. My question is, I know that some people have used this platform before, and they need to register in a specific time slot when they're going to be doing the test, the interview. That's not a feature of this particular FS-02 recruitment process. Is that correct? So we could all, for example, technically show up on the 6th or the 7th and do it, and it will be fine.
As far as I understand, that's correct, because the instructions that your instruction document says that you have this window and that you choose your time. That's what it says. It doesn't say, well, you have to register and you have to log in a particular slot. It does not say that.
Thank you.
And that's been the experience of people who've gone through VidCruiter as well before. It's like you pick your time whenever you're going to do it. That's your business. But go ahead, Shariqua.
Thanks, CJ. I was just wondering, it says Knowledge of Global Affairs Canada Priorities, fiscal year 2020-2021. Just wanted to confirm if they actually meant this current one or like the last fiscal.
No.
I emailed them to confirm, but haven't heard back. But do we just assume there's no typos?
No, there's no typo. It's the departmental plan for 2021. That one is available on. It's open to the public, so that one.
Oh, right. Okay.
Look, that's the departmental plan that you can see.
Okay, and then I guess the next, it's not available yet for the.
Right. In terms of definitions of competencies, we're not quite sure.
Okay.
However, do have those of us who are in Global Affairs Canada, of course, have access to 4 of the competencies, according to the competency dictionary that's laid out in Global Affairs Canada. And I'll share just those pages with you. So at least you'll see what those are. And any competencies that are being assessed by Global Affairs Canada will have at least some similarities to what's laid out there in the competency dictionary behind our intranet, behind our firewall. Right? Okay, any other questions off the top? Okay, should we also look at the departmental results report from 2019-2020? Julia has asked this question. I wouldn't bother. It's not. honestly, it's again, from the way your document is laid out, your confirmation document, it suggests to me that the section on knowledge of the departmental priorities is going to be a written test. And it suggests to me that it's not going to be, tell us all the knowledge that you have, the things you've memorized out of what happened last year. It's more going to be, do you have an understanding of how this place works? Do you have an understanding of, why we do what we do and what we're focused on and what we're trying to accomplish? It's more that kind of understanding. And then as an FS2 officer, do you have an understanding of how your work contributes to furthering the mandate of the department? That's the idea. They want to know, do you know where you fit in the big picture? I think that's where they're going with that. Let's see. Just looking to see. Sharika, is your hand still up from before, or do you have another question?
Oh, sorry. That's from before. No wonder my arms are tired.
Okay, Sylvie and then Eve, go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much for organizing this. I'm actually very new to the dictionary of competency dictionary, so I'm not used to work with this. And I actually had two questions with regard to this dictionary. So the first one is, for any competency, if we take the first one, like the base one on intercultural proficiency, we can see that there are levels. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And I wasn't sure, how does that apply to FS? Does that mean that 1 is FS1, 2 is FS2, 3 is FS3? So is that correct or not quite?
Whenever we ask HR, they never tell us. But what you can see is that as you move from 1 to 4, the responsibilities get more and more complex. And as you can see, as you start to move into 3 and 4, there are management responsibilities in there. So that suggests to me that 1 is very similar to what you would expect an FS1 to do. 2 is similar to what you'd expect an FS2 to do. 3 is what you'd expect from an FS3, who now has more management responsibilities. And 4 certainly would be at the program manager level, if not higher, and is what you would expect from an FS4. So my advice to you is to don't go any lower than 2, but focus on everything in 1 and 2, and then see if you can't also pull in things from 3, and you should be safe. The FS2 level is not a management level, right? Right there, you normally don't have very much in the way of management responsibilities at the FS2. At post, you may have an assistant who reports to you, or some students, or an intern, or something like this. But aside from that, really and truly, you're the more junior person, right? So you're reporting to the manager as opposed to being the manager. So the expectation would not be the answer from the manager, the program manager's perspective, because that's not the level you're going to.
Okay. Can I go on with my second question?
Hold on. Okay, so there's some comments there as well. Some people say, well, the MCO is a bit different. It's true, but then remember that a lot of MCOs are MCOs because they're going to smaller missions. In a larger mission, an FS2 wouldn't be the MCO, you'd be the DMCO. Isn't that so? Okay, go ahead to your second question, Sylvie.
Yes, thank you. Well, basically, I believe you have brushed on this, but I just want to confirm. So let's say we basically focus on the level 2, or like the column under 2. I'm still, and obviously I can see the progression, like if I read the first sentence on the 1, I can see that the level of difficulty is higher on the 2. But when it comes to actually speaking during the interview, do I have to refer to 1, kind of saying, let me see if I can take the example from the dictionary itself. For example, like, again, intercultural proficiency, it says is able to identify and describe your own norms, values, and behavior. And then after that, the second level is kind of able to identify some cultural assumption and behaviors, that will have possible impact. So during the interview, should I or would I be required, or is it expected of me to actually say that not only I can identify my own norms and values and how my behavior is influenced by that, but also how I apply that? Like, basically, do I refer to column 1 and 2, or just column 2 with the assumptions that if I can do 2, I can do 1?
Yeah, it really depends on the question, and it depends on how you approach your answer. There are ways you can weave things in when you're talking, but really should be aiming for that 2 or even 3 in order to show that you have that competency. If you spend your time talking about 1, then you've shown that that's where you are, right? And now you've used up time that you could have been using showing that you were at 2 or even 3.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Eve had a question, and then there was a question from Julia in the chat, so I'll address that next.
Thanks, CJ. What about reading a handful of strategia plans from different posts to see how they go from sort of broad, and then they sort of bring it down to their specific plans? Like, would that make sense? Like, I think, to kind of sort of see how the thinking works from sort of, here's our plan of action to align with these objectives, and then you sort of move down.
Well,
or do you think it's too you drive yourself nuts?
For me, it would be a bit too much, because
Too much.
Again, number one is that not all strategic plans are written the same way.
Right, but there must be
Some are
some
written
logic
better.
and a template and a framework,
There is certainly a framework. There's certainly a logic in how it's laid out, but the way in which people write is just different from one place to another. And something that makes sense in one context wouldn't necessarily make sense someplace else. And a lot of times in the strategic plans, people are not making necessarily reference to the whole of the department, right? You can read an individual plan, and what they're talking about is their particular strength. That's what they're talking about. And they're saying, well, this is what I do, as opposed to, okay, this is what the whole department does as a whole.
Right. Okay, thanks.
Okay. Sorry, I'm going to answer Julia's question, then I'm going to come to Rasha. I'm going to ask you to ask your question. So I'm just flipping over here to the chat. Okay. Julia asks, would the written exam questions be more general so that we can demonstrate knowledge for the stream we applied for? For example, choice to elaborate on trade development or FPDS priorities. Yes, that's normally how they're written. Normally they're written so that almost any stream could answer, or you can use your common sense to kind of approach the question, right? Because remember that this competition was not a Global Affairs Canada competition. It wasn't open only to people who already work for Global Affairs. It's open to the entire public service of Canada. So there are people who have made it through the application stage who have never worked in global affairs ever and don't know anything about the different streams that we have and the ways in which we work. And so in order to be fair to them, they have to write these particular questions in such a way that just from studying and just from using your common sense and drawing from your own experience, you can approach the question and give an answer that makes sense, right? Okay, Rasha, go ahead, ask your question, please.
Thank you so much, CJ. I think before I ask my questions, I really want to make a point to thank you, and I think I speak on, everyone is just so appreciative. And I joined Monday's session, and it was so useful. And so I'm joining again just because I found the discussions have been honestly the most amount of support I've seen for a process. So thank you really for leading this and being generous with your time and your advice. The questions I wanted to ask, I did ask the email for the FS-02, but I wanted to ask them here in case anyone got an answer before me. And so the first one was on the competency dictionary, and I'm sorry if I missed it because I did join late, whether it will be on the GAC dictionary or whether it's another one that's available somewhere publicly, which I know on Monday we said we did not find one, and I also searched and I couldn't. The second one is the competencies that will be assessed in writing and orally, and I know we kind of deduced that there's some that will be in writing and some orally, and I wanted to know if anyone got more information on that, or we're just going to kind of stick to what we estimate it to be. And the third, which is probably the most important one, is whether we have to do the interview and the written exam on the same day. or whether we can take separate days. I know if you're doing the interview, you have to do it at one shot. You can't leave the system. And if you do the written exam, you do it in one shot. You can't leave the system. But do we have to do the full 80 minutes and then the 90 minutes or whatever the time is for the written in the same day? I didn't get an answer. So if anyone has advice, or CJ, if you know, I'd really appreciate that. Thank you.
Has anybody heard anything? You've heard I've asked some of those questions already, and I don't know whether I'll get a response, but I encourage all of you to ask those questions because HR certainly has to respond to those of you who are in the competition. As far as the only thing that I would guess would be that the last question that you asked about doing the two pieces on the same day, it says in your letter that you can do them separately. What separately means, I'm not sure. And so it's appropriate to ask, well, what exactly does that mean? Can I, schedule one on one day and another on another day? Which is what I think it means. That's what I would guess, but get them to tell you and confirm. Does anyone have any further information on that? Does anybody know? See anything? Yeah, I think other people have read that document and said it looks like you can do it on separate days, but they should really be more clear. Don't you think? Why don't you ask these questions after the fact? Why don't you just tell us? All right. Does anybody have any questions about VidCruiter, aside from the ones we've talked about already in this session? Do you have any questions about what it's like? Some people are new to this is the first session that they've joined. So maybe if you've never had any experience with VidCruiter before, you want us to go over, well, what exactly does it look like? How does it work? Yolanda, go ahead.
Hi. Well, first of all, thank you very much for organizing this. And this is my first time using VidCruiter, so I just wanted to know a little bit more of the format. So I understand that the interview is basically you're kind of filming yourself, and then I guess a file goes to whoever's running the platform. But I was wondering how the exam part works, if there is also a camera on, if there's any like type of video being sent. And I'm actually a bit worried about all of this because I'm in a place where the connection is really bad. So I just want to make sure that I have everything in place so that I don't have technical problems while I'm in the middle of it. Thanks.
Yeah. Has anybody here on the line gone through a VidCruiter process before? If you have, please put your hand up so we can see who you are. Maybe you can comment. Go ahead, Lynn. Do you have any insight on, and also go ahead, yeah, Shariqua. Does any of you have any insight onto a written test via VidCruiter?
Yeah, I recently did the FS-01, and I believe for that process, we couldn't do a separate date and time. So after I did all the interview questions, I did the written one. There wasn't any issues. It was pretty like one form, you just type it in. And then when the time is up, they just submit it. So it's automatic. Okay. I waited right until the last minute. But in terms of any technical difficulties, there wasn't much. When I was doing the practice run, I had one or two questions to the VidCruiter chat team, and they're pretty good at responding right away. So,
okay, so first things first. In the written portion, then what happens is that you click through and you say, yes, I want to start the written exam, and get your question. Is that correct?
Yes.
And then, then you prepare for how long did you have to prepare? Do you remember?
Not sure if there was, like, I know we had 10 minutes for each of the interview questions. I can't remember if there was a separate time to prepare for the written one or if it just went directly and you just had the 40
I think
minutes.
so. If I can step in, I think it was just like a free time, like, let's go. You had the questions and then you just you manage your own time, which can be stressful, and I need to work on managing my own time.
So they gave you both questions at once. Is that correct?
It was just one question for that.
It was one question, because in this exam it's two questions. So we don't know. Are they going to give you both questions at once, or are they going to split the time for you and say, here's the first question, time runs out for that. Here's the second question, time runs out for that.
Yeah, it was just one question. And the thing that I kind of, it was a bit of a shock that they didn't tell us before was that it was you had to use an example from a prior work example to answer the written, and they said you must provide a reference person to verify this example. So this was not stated before. So luckily my reference, checked her personal email and got back to me. And they said, if you can't, provide it right away, like within 24 hours or 48 hours, you had to provide the reference. So that was a bit odd, which they didn't let us know beforehand. So
That's amazing. Okay.
yeah, I guess I'm glad I had an example from one of my references, but yeah.
Yeah, we do talk about, how do you pull information from your personal experience or your work experience in order to come up with things to answer these questions. So maybe that's one thing we should address in a future session. Okay, so going back to the format, when you have the written test, let's say one question, we'll worry about two questions later. So you have one question, you say you want to start the written test. The question appears on the screen. Does the competency as well appear on the screen that you're answering to?
I don't remember if the competency is there, but I remember the question moves. So I'm visual. So like I think the question was like in the middle at the top. And then when the recorded started or something like that, I think it just moved to the right so I could see myself. But then when I wanted to refer back to the question to make sure I answered every part of the question, I was like looking at the right. So anyway, it took some adjustment on the spot to just yeah, because if you have it written in paper, you could use like a highlighter or things like that. But now to identify the keywords, it was a little bit different. I don't know if others on the call remember if we had the competencies.
No, just the one that you were supposed to be answering, yes?
Yeah, so for each interview questions at the top, it told you what they were assessing. So sometimes there was one question that they were assessing two.
Yes, but for the written part, did they tell you the
For the
competency?
written, I don't remember. It's a blur.
And then
I believe so. I believe it did.
And then for the written exam, they provide you essentially a blank space in which to write. Is that
Yes.
correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you're
like
not
a
working in
Word
Word
pad.
and then doing something.
No,
You're
it's
writing
like basically
directly
like
in there.
a form, like a blank Word pad type form, and you type directly in there.
Okay. Okay, is that clear for everybody? Is that Yolanda? Does that answer your questions?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
And also, I would presume that there's the timer at the top of the page for the written part, the same way there is for the interview questions.
I believe so, but I don't quite remember.
Yeah, and then it shuts down, when you're finished.
Yeah,
That's
it shut down. I was fixing a typo and it shut down on me.
Okay. Nancy, go ahead, please.
Hi, I had a lot of issues with the technology and I learned a lot of good lessons on that last interview I did. And so if I could share some with you,
Please.
we couldn't use our Signet laptops for those of us at GAC for the previous competition, but I've gotten an email now saying that we can, so we can actually use our technology, which is really good because I did it with my iPad. And the question, I couldn't see the whole question in its entirety, and I couldn't expand all the question. So I kept scrolling back and forth from it was a nightmare. So I would never use an iPad again. So I'm so glad that I can actually use a computer with a mouse and a keyboard, because that was really hard and really distracting to have to go scroll, to go back and read it, and then you couldn't see it. So as soon as I wrote the exam, I actually wrote an email to HR and saying, you have to improve this. If the platform is the way forward, the VidCruiter, it has to be user friendly, right? We have to be able to at least expand all, see the button. If we want to print the questions, give ourselves a few extra minutes to print that. And, for those of us that are really visual, because I had I had so many issues, but it was all because of the technology I was using. So very happy to see that we can use Signet this time around.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Okay, any further questions or comments on the VidCruiter platform? Go ahead, if there's anyone who wants to speak. Okay, if there, go ahead. Anik, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. For those who have already done a written exam through the VidRecruit platform, do you know if there was a word limit to the written question? And can you work in Word and then paste it into the platform, or is that not an option? Thanks.
So for the FS1, if I could jump in, there was a word limit. And I don't know if there was an option to cut and paste, but like I think you have to sort of, they told us to type directly in there. I'm assuming they won't let you cut and paste in case you've, copy. They don't want you to use
You
any
cut out a bit
material,
there,
right?
Shukra.
So
I think you're saying that they won't let you cut and paste from another platform.
I'm assuming
into-
because you can't use any external material during the exam. So this, if they allow you to do that, you're potentially able to maybe cut and paste stuff you already have. So based on that, I would assume that you're supposed to just directly type it in there. That's what I did based on the instructions I got in that other exam.
So the
Yes, we
form
get-
that it's in, sorry, so the form that's in VidRecruiter that you have to type into, is there the functionality to kind of have bullets or spell check or underline?
I believe there is spell check, but
Okay,
I don't quite remember. I'm sorry.
that's okay. Thank you. We have time to do the practice anyways, like to get familiar with it, I think, but I'm not sure if that's just for the interview part or the written part, but
Yeah.
we'll get in there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that was also the question in the chat. ¿Es que le correcta? And the answer is no, no por el FS1. So at least not for the FS1, there was not a spell check, was the answer that came back. Okay, any further questions there on the technical aspects? Oh, one other thing I wanted to mention. If you're afraid about your connectivity from where you are, what I'd suggest you do is alert VidRecruiter right away. Like, don't even wait until you start. Just say, look, I'm having this issue. I don't know if the connection will be stable. I'll do your practice ahead of time and try your best. But things happen, next thing you know, there's a power cut, there's a power outage, there's a blackout, something happens during the time that you're doing the test. And if you're able to flag ahead of time to say, look, I'm in an area that's known for these kind of problems, it makes it that much easier if you have to go back to them later and say, look, I did indeed have that problem that day. Make sense? Okay, let me see if there are any other questions or comments. No. Okay, very good. Okay, so if there are no more questions or comments on VidRecruiter, we can move in to start to talk about some of the competencies. All right, so what I'm going to do is share with you if I can. I'm going to have these documents. I'm going to try to see if we can upload them. And what I thought we could focus on today was the judgment in a global context competency. I'm hoping that I can do this. Trying to add this file so that you can see just the pages that have the competencies that are useful here. If anything, I'll show it to you on my screen, and so we'll go through it. And what I wanted to do today is not just go through the competency and go through a question, but I also wanted to dig into some of those subcategories that are in the definition of that particular competency, just so you can get practice in how to read through that competency, how to pull out some keywords for yourself, and how to apply those keywords in your answers. So right off the top, I have to tell some of you, I'm going to be looking for volunteers to address the question that I'm going to put in the chat momentarily. So if you prepare yourselves, who's going to volunteer? Put your hands up from now if you're brave. Who is interested? Nancy saying, why did I leave my hand up? Who is going to volunteer to take on some of the questions? Nancy's like, I'll put my hand down right now.
It won't go down.
Would you like to see the question first before? That's not what you want?
Yes, please.
Yeah, you're nervous now. You're all nervous. All right, why don't we look at that competency first? And I'll just share my screen. And I'll figure out how to add this link somewhere else. Oh, it would be helpful if I pull the document. How about that? Okay, so I want to actually pull it up, not just in English, but also in French, for those of you who are more comfortable in French. So I'll do that now as well. There, okay, so now I have them both up on my screen, and I will share my screen with you. All right. So here we have, do you see my screen? If anybody does not, please just say so. Because, yeah, you can all see it. Wonderful. Okay, so here are the base competencies here. I'll go to the top. I just printed just the main ones here as opposed to the entire document. So this I should be able to share as a link, as a file. So here it is in French as well. But what I want to do is go past intercultural proficiency, past influencing, and to judgment within a global context. So we'll look at this competency both in English and French. Jugement dans un contexte mondial. Okay, so in English, employees at Global Affairs Canada make well-founded decisions based on the priorities and values of the organization and identify shared interests, both nationally and internationally, and cultivate them to persuade others. They anticipate how decisions will be received across Canada and internationally, and adapt their strategies and interactions with international parties accordingly. Global Affairs Canada's international context requires working in the face of uncertainty and incomplete information, assessing risks and identifying workable options. They are aware of sensitivities and know when and how to act in order to resonate with others. They know what can be realistically done. Here it is in French. Les employés d'AMC prennent des décisions éclairées en fonction des priorités et des valeurs de l'organisation et cernent des intérêts communs à l'échelle nationale et internationale qu'ils cultivent pour persuader les autres. Ils anticipent la façon dont seront reçues les décisions au Canada et à l'étranger et adaptent leurs stratégies et interactions avec les parties internationales en conséquence. Le contexte international dans lequel AMC mène ses activités exige de travailler dans l'incertitude en se fondant sur des renseignements incomplets, d'évaluer les risques et de définir les options applicables. Les employés connaissent les sensibilités des autres et savent comment et quand agir afin de trouver un écho auprès d'eux. Ils savent ce qu'il est réaliste d'accomplir. So you'll forgive the Anglophone's accent in French, but those are the definitions that are within the competency dictionary of Global Affairs Canada. So if we were to look here, at least here up to level 2, there are certain elements that are here, right? So for me, what I would do, looking at these competencies, is to read through all of the essential bullet points that are here underneath section 2. I'd have a look at 3 for sure, have a look at 1, but I would concentrate in 2. And I would pull out some keywords in this section so that I could remember them for the exam. Because again, what we've seen in the past is that you're not allowed to bring in any extra papers or preparatory notes. So you have to bring them in your mind, right? With your whatever mnemonic device or memory device that you use to make sure that you remember what is in each competency, right? So if you look here, for instance, in the English, it says applies the criteria for choosing the best course of action or strategy. Then the impact of one Global Affairs Canada initiative on another, the trends, external influences. So in here, you might say best course of action, right? Like that might be the thing. What best strategy, criteria for best strategy, something like that is what I would use for that. Selects the best decisions in moderately challenging situations by weighing the possibilities, right? Provides accurate and timely information to help guide decision-making, including outside the Canadian context. Provides tailored recommendations to the appropriate audience. For example, to the Assistant Deputy Minister or to a recipient outside of Global Affairs Canada. Factors in protocol and the environment of the host country in prioritizing requests. Carries out decisions that reflect organizational priorities and Canadian interests. Okay? So that's all what they mean when they say judgment here. What I'm going to do is show here on my screen, I'll show the French, so people who would like to see what all of that looks like in French can do so. I will not torture you further with more of my pronunciation, but it's all right. All right. So do you see how you'd start to pull out to say, well, how do I summarize some of this? How do I understand this? How can I put this in my own words? What are the key words that I would want to pull from this definition so that when I'm going through my answer, the person who's doing the evaluation says, oh yeah, that's a tick. Yeah, we're evaluating judgment. That's a tick. Yeah, for sure. They got that down. They got that down. What are some of the things that you would pull out of this definition? Go for it, because while I'm sharing my screen, I can't see your hands up. So you just have to jump in. What are some of the things that you'd pull out?
Moi, je dirais peser le pour et le contre. Ça serait dans mes mots-clés. Considérer l'environnement du pays hôte, probablement, pour montrer. Et puis, si j'avais à faire une liste là, des quelques expressions que je voulais garder en tête, c'est... j'avais copié ce que tu avais dit, les meilleures stratégies, évaluer les meilleures stratégies.
Copycat.
Exactement. Mais donc, si je comprends bien le processus, même en téléconférence, on ne peut pas avoir de notes. Là. On ne peut pas, je veux dire, pour les mots-clés et tout ça, on n'est pas supposé, c'est ça?
Exactly. You'd keep them in your mind. You keep them so that you can jog your own memory. Oh, yes, that was in there. Oh, yes, that was in there.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. What else would people pick out of here? Which elements would jump out at you? Either here, and remember, it's not just here in the definitions, the bullet points. It's also here at the top, right? Because that gives you the whole idea of what the competency is all about. Here it is in English again. For those of you more comfortable in English.
But I just have a question, if I may.
Sure.
I was talking with a few people about this competition, and some people who have gone through this have said that it's a very good idea to put in context the actual question, like to put it in a broad context, to put it in a global context, and then use the and then bring it back to Canada and a little bit like you were saying, and then how do you fit into this? And I just wanted to confirm that this is something that you would put forward.
Sure. All of that depends on the wording of the question, and it depends what competency is being assessed. So we'll get into that when we talk about how to structure your answer and how to weave in that overall context, right? There's ways you can do it really simply without spending too much time, right? Because what you want to do is make sure you answer the question. That's the main thing. Answer the question that's asked. You want to present your answer in such a way that it flows in a very logical fashion. So you want a really good structure to your answer. And then you want to make sure that you weave in elements from the competencies that are being assessed and that you answer the question from the perspective of that competency. A lot of questions can be answered from different points of view, but what's being assessed is the competency that's at the top of the page, right? So make sure you answer from that perspective. So those are the critical elements. Yes, make sense? All right, I'll come back to you now. Do you need this to still be on the screen?
No.
Then we can come off. Okay, I'm going to come back now to you.
If other feels differently.
He has answered for everyone.
To speak for everybody.
When I figure this out, I will actually add it. But what I will do now is I'll take that question now. Sorry, Rasha, did you have a question? Go ahead.
No, well, it's fine. We can go to the example, but just you know, to your question of what jumps out at us, I think the point about reflecting organizational priorities and Canadian interests is one that I don't know if it would be useful in this context because it's more of a knowledge piece, but saying, you know, I check the departmental priorities, I would check the speech from the throne, I would check the mandate letter, and just showing that you're going to be, you know, you don't have to say what's listed in there, but just saying you'll reference these things to inform whatever you're putting forward to make sure it is advancing Canadian interests.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's certainly useful depending on the question, right? If the question is asking you broadly, how would you make sure that what you're proposing is in line with Canada's priorities? That's when you pull in that information to show that you know that, right? Those are the sources where you go. If, for instance, they're asking you a question that's saying, interpersonal conflict at work, it's not necessarily useful to reference the speech from the throne, right? You're dealing with a different competency, right? Does that make sense? Okay, so now I'm going to post my question. And then we'll see who wishes to take advantage of this opportunity to answer it, or to at least to address it. It's not easy. And then, there we go. See if that works. All right. So it is in English. And here I'll read it out so that you can get a sense of it that way as well, for people who understand things better when they hear them as opposed to reading them.
CJ, sorry, did you mean to share it? Did you mean to share your screen with the question, because we still see the competency?
Let me close that then.
Yeah, I unshare and then
Let me unshare. Okay, can you see now in the chat window? Do you see the question that I posted there? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so I'll read it out as well while you are also reading. Judgment in a global context is the competency being assessed. The question goes as follows. You are an officer at post. For goodness sake. One of your responsibilities is to participate in a multi-government council that presents common concerns to the host government. This is a forum through which Canada advocates for its own positions and where we work to support like-minded foreign governments with respect to their country's positions. The host government has recently changed due to local elections. The new government appears to be more hostile to Canadian values than the previous government. In addition, some of Canada's foreign diplomatic counterparts in the country have started to complain about the council. These counterparts state that the council is ineffective and that it would be better to abandon the existing council in favor of creating a new, smaller body that would present its views to the host government. Several representatives of different governments have approached you to complain about the council and to share negative information about some of the diplomats who serve on the council's executive committee. Members of the council's executive committee have also approached you to inquire whether you would like to serve as a member of the executive committee. In this situation, how would you determine the best course of action? How would you determine what factors to consider? Which individuals would you need to include in your discussions or decisions, and why? Are you thinking about this question then? What do you think of the question?
Many complexities.
Exactly.
Many components. That's great.
Now, this, as most questions are, some of this information is based on real events. So I will certainly be happy to share some of the background of this question once you've had a chance to take a crack at it. Okay, go ahead, Gwen. You want to take a crack?
Yeah, I'll start, but I won't do everything. I'm gonna hope that other people jump in.
Okay.
So my first reaction would be to make sure that I gather all the information that I do have in an organized manner, so that when I'm proposing any rationale for any decision, I would know that I've looked at the available pieces of information that I have, including conversations with the variety of interlocutors that may be coming with either complaints, concerns, or potential positions of power. And then after assessing all the information that I do have, probably consult upwards and indicate to my manager that this is a situation around which we may need to make a decision. And then talk about the different actors and their influence in the council and in the country. And then try to discuss with them if they believe that we have faced this before, or if they have recommendations for a path forward prior to taking any action. Definitely wouldn't complain to the other countries myself backwards. So that's how I would start looking at it, is basically gathering information and organizing how to go forward, and making sure that any conversations that I would have externally would be measured, diplomatic, kind, and respectful, in the hopes of always seeking a positive resolution to any issue. While not always possible, it's always good to start with that compassionate stance, and it's also in line with Canada's view on the multilateral forums in the world. So that would be the start, and I will allow somebody else to continue instead of talking for too long.
What do you think of what Gwen? Thank you, Gwen. What do you think of what Gwen has had to add to this to this answer? There are some comments in the chat saying, someone says, I'm running into the political person's office immediately for some more context. And then Lynn has brought out a very good point. She says, look, in the FS1 competition, she did not anticipate how long the questions would be, and that it takes a few minutes to read the question and really kind of understand what it's asking you. So that 10-minute preparation time in the oral interview section, it goes by really fast. So you do have to manage your time, right? You have to give yourself time to read the question. Okay, so let's talk about an approach that you would use for this question, but it's also an approach that you would use for almost all of the questions, right? First is that you have to decide on the structure that you're going to use to answer the question. Sometimes it's the question itself tells you the structure that you should use. If you don't know how to structure your answer, we normally talk about using the STAR format. How many people do not know what the STAR format is? Please raise your hand and we'll go over it very quickly. Okay, very good. No, I'm always glad when people raise their hands, like, I don't know what that is, what you're talking about. Okay, so the STAR format, shall we say it together, those of you who know? This stands for situation, task, action, result. Situation, tâche, action, résultat. So the idea is that you start by summarizing really quickly what the context is. You know, what's the context here? What's the situation? What's the challenge? What's the problem? And then it moves quickly, okay, what are you expected to do with respect to this challenge, this problem in this situation? That's the task, right? Then, okay, now you start to answer the question. What actions are you going to take and why, right? Then after you describe those actions, you talk about the result you would expect. Or if it's asking you a question about something that happened in the past, you talk about the results you did actually get from doing those particular actions. There are sometimes people add a second R, where they'll say, well, it's more like your reflections. Like, what did you learn as a result? Looking back, what would I have done differently? Oh, I would have done a different action. I would have adjusted my strategy because then I could have had a better result. Sometimes people add a second A, where they're saying assumptions, right? Which is to say, when you're starting to answer the question, you state up front what your assumptions are. And we'll talk about that in this question, because we're going to go over the question again, and we're going to look at it a bit more closely. So sometimes people will say, well, I assume that I am, you know, I'm at a big post with lots of colleagues, right? Or sometimes they might say, I assume I'm by myself. I'm in a one-person office. I'm by myself. So there are such things that people can do. There's a question for people to please go on mute if you're making noise. Please mute your line. So those are the kinds of things that people would assume. But we'll look at this question and we'll see where you might want to make some assumptions. Is everybody clear on that format, the STAR format? Situation, task, action, result. Okay, you're good with this. Okay, we'll see how that applies. Yeah, go ahead.
Clear on that. Sorry, I just have a quick question. In this type of question, would you try to round it out with your own experience if you have applicable experience? So like, I'm not sure how that fits into the STAR model, but I get the answering the question as presented, but taking it one step further.
Sure. Remember that you have limited time. So your main goal is to answer the question. If you have experience that resonates with the question, you can say, well, I found myself in exactly this position. What you want to do is be able to reference your experience really smoothly and quickly so that it amplifies some of your answer. So for instance, you say, well, I would consult with such and such non-governmental organization. Let's say you're answering a question and that's one of the actions you would take. I would do that because I think it would be a really effective way of gathering this information. When I was working for such and such organization, the non-governmental organization in that country was very helpful, and it actually provided us with a great deal of insight. So based on my experience, based on my previous knowledge, I know that this sometimes can be a very effective way of getting information that's required. So that's why I would choose this course of action. You see, you weave it in.
Yeah, that's perfect. So I can see the advantage of weaving it in, but I also can see you can really go off on a tangent if you start going too far down that road. So try to keep it succinct. Okay, that's excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, that's exactly right. When you're talking about your previous experience, sometimes people go off, as Mark says, into a big tangent, and they start talking about all the things they did. And while they're talking about their previous experience, if that's not the question, then it means they're not answering the question. You have limited time. So focus on answering the question, and you just drop in your experience wherever it comes to mind. But we'll talk about the actual technique here. If you saw this question on the exam, and this was an oral question, let's say, what you do, you'd have 10 minutes, right? You have 10 minutes to prepare. So what the first thing that I suggest you do is read the question, and you do what Gwen did, essentially, is that you just jot down all the things that come to mind. You know, these are the big meaty parts of the question. These are the things that I have to really make sure I address. These are things, you just put it down on your page. So normally the things that jump out at you are the things that are the heart of the question, the things that are the most important, the things that you want to make sure to address. Who put an unhappy face on my question? That's amazing. Anyway, so you pull out the main body of the question, main points that are in the question, right? And you'd also make sure that when you see what heading there is, what proficiency is listed there, that you write down your key words, right? Okay, when I'm answering from judgment within a global context, I want to make sure I mention these kind of bullet points. This is when you just kind of write down what you've brought in your mind regarding that competency. That's the wording you're going to use from the competency. These are the things you're going to refer to when you're giving your answer, right? Now, the next, tendency that people have is they start trying to answer the question right away. I strongly encourage you not to do that. I strongly encourage you to, once you've done that first dump of information on the page of the competency, the bullet points you have in your mind, and the main things that you saw in the question, go back and read the question again. Read it slowly, read it carefully, read it out loud, read it to yourself, and just go through and say, did I miss anything? Did I misunderstand anything? Let me just go through calmly and just say, okay, what do I really want to make sure to address here? Let me pull that information. Okay. And you pull out the stuff that seems important. And then the main thing you're going to do is look at the question that's being asked of you. You must answer that question from the perspective of the competency. Normally, the question that is put to you can be answered from a number of different angles, but the angle they're looking for is the competency that's at the top. You understand? So make sure you do that. Yes? Make sure you answer from the perspective of the competency. All right? Is that everyone clear on that? We're going to go through this question in a second. Any other questions on that? Go ahead, Sylvie.
Yes, thank you. I'm not sure if I understand completely, because if we go back to the scenario, by the way, sorry, I really appreciate what you explained. Like it makes a lot of sense. I'm just a little bit unclear. So if we look at the scenario, we actually have 3 questions at the end, right? And I'm just unsure of how to apply the star. I mean, I have an idea. Like if I was to answer to this question, I think instead of a situation, I would start with an introduction, such as like either to echo what my colleague said. I would either start with like, this is a very serious situation. It's a difficult situation for Canada to be in. Actually, I've had this experience in the past. Like summarize like in one sentence what, that basically that you had been in that situation before. And then I would say, like, it's hard to put task because this is it's not like, please tell us, an example in your past where you had to demonstrate. This is more like, the task is basically, to answer to those 3 questions. But anyway, like the task is a bit more, not clear to me. But then it's like, how do I get to the actions all the while answering to those 3 questions? Like, should I or should we kind of say, to answer this question, I will respond to the 3 questions that was asked. So like the way I would determine the best course of action would be, and then you list the task for this, and then you go to the second question and you list the task for this, and then after that you kind of say, by saying all the things I've said, as the result, I would get the results of blah blah blah. Like how do you mingle all of that together?
It's easy to get lost in some of these multi-factor questions. All right, so who wants to help Sylvie here? Who wants to take a shot? Because we can read the question carefully and you'll start to see it come clear. Okay, so first things first, you are an officer at post. What information could you assume here? What would be useful to you to assume?
Well, I would maybe clarify, like, I'm not a manager or something like that, just to clarify, like, in this situation, I'm I don't know, I'm going to assume I'm an FS-02 with a portfolio with, I don't know, like if I'm in trade, I could say in my field, something like that.
Perfect. Normally, if they don't tell you what stream you're in, assume that it's a stream that is most advantageous for you, right? One that you know well, because you can answer from that perspective. And then if you want to pull something from your experience, it makes perfect sense for you to pull something from what you've done before into this example where you're doing the same kind of work, right? Also, it says here you're an officer, it doesn't say what level. Of course, you're in an FS-02 exam. Guess what? Say you're an FS-02 officer at post. That makes perfect sense. That's what we mean when you say put in your assumptions, and put in assumptions of things that are going to help you as best as possible, right? That's going to make it easy for you to answer the question. The only thing with assumptions is that you cannot assume away, you cannot make an assumption that eliminates part of the question for you, right? So for instance, if you had a conflict at work, if the question were about a conflict at work, and you had to resolve a conflict between 2 people that you work with, let's say, you could assume, for instance, that all 3 of you speak the same language. You could say, well, I assume that there's no language barrier between us, so we can all speak together. And I also assume that I have a good individual relationship with both people. So it's easy for me to approach either one of them together or to approach them individually. Those are fair assumptions to make. An unfair assumption, one that does not make sense, would be, I assume that the 2 people went out for drinks last night and they've all put all the problem behind them and now they're best buddies. I'm sorry, no. You cannot assume away the heart of the question. In that example, the heart of the question was the interpersonal conflict that you have to resolve, yes? So that's what we mean about making sure you make assumptions that help you, but do not assume away the heart of the question. Okay. So in this particular example, you've made some assumptions. You can make assumptions about the post. You can say, I assume as well that I have a program manager who's there at post with me. I assume I have an ambassador who's there at post with me as well. You can make those assumptions. You can assume that there are other programs as well that are at the post. You can assume a big mission if you want, right? So those are things. And again, you read through the question and you see what works for you. Now, the question tells you that one of your responsibilities is to participate in this council. So there's lots of other governments. Again, it doesn't tell you how many, right? So you can assume there's a lot, or you can assume there's only a few. You get to decide what makes sense for you in terms of how you answer the question. So it's a multi-government council, so lots of other ones. You advocate Canada's positions from this council. What positions? We don't know. Again, you can make some assumptions here. If you're, on the trade side, you can say, well, we're advocating trade positions, through this council. If you're, on the political side, we're advocating political messages. We're advocating development messages, whatever. You can put whatever you want. Also, it says that we also work to support like-minded foreign governments. So there are other governments who are similar to Canada. That's what like-minded means. That's a phrase that's used a lot in the department. If you're outside the department, I'm not sure if you've heard this term before, but it means our typical allies, the people who typically think like us, act like us, we normally find ourselves on the same side of most issues, right? Those are like-minded. And so we work to support like-minded foreign governments with respect to their country's positions. So even if they're not our positions, we work in partnership with other countries on this council. There's information about the host government, the government where you are, it's changed. And it's like, maybe they're a bit different. They seem more hostile. Now, again, it says it appears to be more hostile. Maybe it isn't, right? Maybe it's just the appearance. Okay, but we'll leave that alone for now. And then it goes down to say that there's a problem. Here's where the problem lies, right? The problem lies with the council itself. Apparently, some other governments have a problem with the council and they think it's not effective. I think it's not effective. And now they've come to you. Some people are coming to you and saying, we should go and make our own. We should make our own. The question does not tell you which governments have come to you. Is it your like-mindeds, or are these people who are not so like-minded? Who has come to you, right? So maybe you can make some assumptions there. The other thing is that the counterparts are saying that the council is ineffective, but there's incomplete information. And if you go back to the competency, judgment in a global context, it talks about decision-making when you don't have full information, right? So we continue. Several representatives of different governments have approached you to complain, and they're sharing negative information about the council itself, about the executive committee, the people who are the bureaucrats who are running it, right? So now that same council has come to you and has said, do you want to be on our executive? So look at what's going on here. One, what are the tasks that you have? The situation is this. You're an FS officer in whatever stream you pick at post, and you make your assumptions about the post. That's the situation. The task that you have is that you are part of your job is to advocate on behalf of Canada and to work with like-minded governments as well. That's a secondary responsibility because that's what you've been doing so far, right? So that's what you're using this council to do. That's why Canada's there. It's to advocate its positions to the host government. What's happened? Some people want to leave this council. There's all kind of negative talk about the executive committee. And some people are asking you to join the committee, right? Some people want you to leave the council altogether. Some people want you to get even more involved with it, right? So this is the situation in which you find yourself. So now you seem to have a number of different paths that you can take. How do you determine what the best thing is to do? Read that question again. How do you determine the best course of action? The question did not ask you what is the best course of action. It's asking you how you determine the best course of action. You see the difference there? Do you see the difference? When they're asking you how you determine, they want to know what pieces of information you seek out and how you come to your conclusion. They're not so much interested in your conclusion in itself, but what's your thought process? What things do you think are important and what things do you think are not so important? Where do you seek this information out? How do you know how to weigh up? What are the pros? What are the cons? How do you do that? That's what they're asking when they're looking at this competency. Do you see? Understand? Then it says, how would you determine what factors to consider? Again, what's your process? How do you figure out what factors are more important than others, right? And then the third part is, what individuals do you need to include in your discussions or decisions and why? So this is saying, how do you know who to talk to and for what reason? Why are you talking to so-and-so about this and why, right? Is that clear? Does that make sense? Is that highlighting for you some of the things that you need to consider in answering the question? Go ahead, Lynn.
I have a question because sometimes it's difficult to, like, you get in the moment and you want to perform and you want to say everything. And I think that's what happened, like probably for my first question last time. I looked at all my notes and I was like, I don't even understand my notes. What have I done? So I was thinking that maybe I'll adopt the rule of 3 next time to say, I'm going to say, there's a lot of information that I could consider, but here are the 3 things I will pay the most attention to. And maybe like develop those better and add like my experience to those. But I think it's maybe on purpose that there's so much information that I wish I had time to address each detail to say, like, I really like what the person said a moment ago. It said, I will certainly not do that. And I was like, oh, I would never say that in an interview, but it's valid because you're thinking about, the big no-nos. So I was like, oh, maybe I should do that. And I'm like, oh no, if I keep going into the details, I spoke so fast last time. I was like running for each second of their attention. So I'm not sure that's, also demonstrating really well my ability to speak, and be clear in my messages. So would you say like highlighting 3 things or 4 things is a good way to go?
Yeah, I think you need to focus in your question. You're not going to be able to address everything that's in the question. There's always going to be some nuances there that you're going to miss. That's why when you first read the question, the things that jump out at you, those are the things you address for sure, right? When you read the question a second time, you look to see if there's anything major that you've missed. But quite frankly, if there's all kinds of nuances, so what? You really have to get on with it at a certain point, and you've got to focus on the things that are most of the meat in the sandwich. You understand? And so Cedric has asked a very good question. Do you think it's appropriate to use different star situations for different sub-questions? That can be an effective strategy if you plan that well. So this is the way that we suggest that you go forward. So normally you can set out the situation overall because the context is the same for the entire question, right? You are still an officer post, you're still an FS-02, you're still, whatever you've assumed, those things are going to be the same regardless, right? And then you can summarize really quickly the different tasks that are available, that are presented to you, depending on what the question is. You say, look, just from reading this question, there's a lot of information there. But what I think the main tasks are to determine, first of all, whether we're going to stay a member of this council, whether Canada is going to stay a member of this council, yes or no. And also, whether whether I'm going to serve on the executive committee of the council, right? You can pick those 2. There's other elements in the question. There's talk about, okay, people are, nattering about different members of the council and the information about the host government, but maybe that's not the meat of the question. Maybe this is the heart, and that's what you're going to focus on, right? Because it's not so much about all of the detail in the question. It's more about demonstrating that you as an FS-02 officer have good judgment in this context, right? That's what you're trying to show. So you'd say, okay, these are the 2 things that I'm really focusing on. And the question has asked me, how I would determine the right course of action and how I would figure out what factors to consider and who I would discuss things with, right? So I'm going to deal with those 2 things in 2 parts. First, I'm going to talk about the council itself, whether Canada is going to remain a member. And then I'm going to talk about, first I'm going to talk about how I would judge whether Canada should remain a member. And I'm going to talk about secondarily how we would decide whether I should become a member of the executive, right? So you put those 2 things because those are 2 questions, right? Those are 2 issues. And you can answer those 3 questions, 1, 2, 3, with respect to those 2 tasks. That would be one way of organizing your answer, right? And so then now you put your action and results for the first task and your action and results for the second task. Does that make sense?
CJ, this is Kate here. I just want to say, like, that is such a good assessment of how you tackled that question. Basically asking yourself further questions when you're looking at it. Because, I mean, you're being asked questions right at the end of course, like how to address it. But asking those questions and actually saying them aloud to your evaluator is extremely helpful. So being like, first, okay, let's assess the efficacy of the actual forum. And then the second question, assessing whether Canada should still be a part of the forum. Is it still serving our interests or not? That really, really helped. Because when I first read it, it just seemed like a mountain to climb.
Like so much,
Like
so
Mount
much
Everest.
stuff. Just so much
Mount
stuff.
Everest,
So
for
much
sure.
stuff. Exactly. Exactly.
That's extremely, thanks so much.
So that first part is like, how would you then, what factors would you consider? Okay, so then again, this is what we call signposting, right? You tell the evaluator what you're going to be talking about, and you guide the evaluator through your answer. So your evaluator doesn't get lost in all the details that you're going to present. So that's also why the STAR format is really helpful, because you can really be explicit about the fact that you're moving through this format. And you can say, look, as I'm answering this question, if you want, you can even say, I'm going to use the STAR format to approach it. Or you can say, I'm just going to give you an outline of how I'm going to answer this question to make it easy for you to follow me, right? And then you explain, okay, this is the situation. These are the assumptions that I'm making. Okay, now that I've made these assumptions, and now I've talked to you about the two major tasks that I see in this question, I'm going to address them one at a time. So here's the first one. You see, you go back and you repeat what you said. I'm addressing the first one, whether Canada should stay on this council. This question is not asking me to actually answer whether we should stay on the council. This question is measuring judgment in a global context. So it's from that perspective that I'm going to give you my comments right now. So in order to really demonstrate that I have good judgment, I need to do this, do this, do this, do this, right? So the first thing you've asked me is, how do I determine, what was the question? What factors to consider? I think that's what it was. How do I determine the best course of action with respect to the council? Well, as an FS-02 officer in a really large mission, I think the first thing I would need to do would be to get some guidance from my program manager. I would need to bring this to my program manager's attention so that we could put our heads together and brainstorm what this means. Also, I would need to try to get more information, because part of good judgment means acting as complete information as possible. And it's possible that my program manager has a far broader perspective on what's going on with respect to this council and the history of this council, more so than I might have, right? So that's how I would determine the best course of action. Another way that I would try to determine the best course of action might be to ask my fellow like-mindeds. The question tells me that there are some government people who don't want to be on this council anymore, but I don't know who they are. If Canada has been aligned with other governments in the past, perhaps Canada can be aligned with them right now. And I would go and I would ask my fellow like-mindeds and say, have you heard about people wanting to leave the council, and what do you think? And I would bring that information into my mission. That would help us determine the best course of action. Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, that was perfect. And the question is very complex, and it's an excellent example for us to work through. And so you've chosen it on purpose, and we appreciate that. Thank you very much. But I guess this one specifically you've outlined is it's testing judgment within a global context, but it very easily lends itself to another one, which is influencing and alliance building, because you're not going to be able to do anything within this form or council unless you have good alliances. At the end of the day, that's what the job is at Post. It's talking with everybody so that you're in the loop, so that Canada is well positioned to advance its own interests, right? How much emphasis would you put on trying to highlight other competencies that aren't necessarily being tested by that question, but lend themselves naturally to try to weave a few more together?
When they put that competency at the top, that's what the evaluator has in their marking sheet, right? That's what they have. They don't have other competencies there. They only have this.
So they don't care. So they don't care about like alliance building or anything. Don't even bother to mention it or use the key talking points.
The only thing that you might want to say in something like this is to say, look, one of the different, how would you determine what factors to consider, right? That's one of the questions. Well, how I would determine the factors to consider in making this decision is what my role is at Post. Part of my role is to build alliances with like-minded. That's part of my job. And so if I leave this council, I have to determine whether I'm going to be as effective in the new body as we were in the old body. You see? So that's a factor, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So that's how
Don't-
you bring it in.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
great. So don't stress it too much, but just kind of link it in as you go along. Okay, perfect.
Yeah, that
Excellent.
makes sense. Yeah, so go back to the definition and pull out the elements in the definition of the competency, and that's how you guide yourself through this answer. So then you'd go through, make sure you answer your 3 questions, for however many tasks you've set out for yourself. So in this question, we've set 2 tasks, so that means we have to answer those 3 questions for the first task, and you have to answer those 3 questions for the second task. You got to answer for both, right? Because that's what you've set out. And then at the end, you'd say, okay, well, the result I would expect would be that, Canada, we'd be able to continue our mandate. We'd be able to continue, working with our counterparts. We would be able to manage really well our relationship with the new host government. Maybe this is an opportunity to actually forge a good relationship with the new host government, whatever, right? Those are the kinds of things you'd say as a result. All right. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, anybody want to give a crack at this? Anybody want to try answering part of this question? Because we left out the second part. Should you be on the council? Oh, no one's brave. Come on. This was one of the harder competencies, I must say. Some of the other ones are far more concrete, and so it's much easier to address them. But I picked judgment within a global context today because it's kind of vague, right? It's one of those things, it's a competency that helps you do the rest of your job. Other competencies talk about your job that you need to do. This is a competency that helps you do the rest of your job. And so because it's that kind of step backwards from the actual work, it's a difficult one to see. It's harder to address. But again, go back to your definition and see what it says there. It's a lot about weighing up options. It's a lot about how do you consider what you do? Where do you get your information from? Who do you talk to? Who do you advise? How do you come up with recommendations? What do you take into consideration, right? It's all the things that you consider when you're doing your job. That's what this competency is. Make sense? Yeah, any more questions there? Because what it can do is tell you where this question came from. If you would like to know. All right, should we spend some time talking about how these things, come up in real life at Post? All right, so this is something similar is at play here right now. I'm at Post right now in Barcelona, and we are normally all diplomats abroad are members of the diplomatic corps or the consular corps, wherever you are. So if you're in the administrative capital of the country, you're normally a part of the diplomatic corps, which is to say all the foreign diplomats who are in the country, who are in the administrative capital, are kind of made members of the diplomatic corps. And normally the diplomatic corps kind of gets together and talks about stuff and says, these are the things affecting all the diplomats themselves, or these are things that are affecting our the representatives of our country who are here. So our tourists, our business people, whatever it is. So these are things affecting them. And then as diplomats representing these countries, we use this forum to talk to our host government to say, look, this is something that's going on. So outside of the administrative capital, of course, it's not the diplomatic corps, it's the consular corps, because we're in consulates. And so in major cities, you might have a consular corps. And depending where you are in the world, some of these bodies are very active. Some of them, they're not active at all. Who knows? So here in Barcelona, the Cuerpo Consular, the consular corps here, is active and has a lot of members. But some of the members are posted as diplomats from their host countries, and some of them are honorary consuls, who are essentially local people who are chosen to represent a particular government that does not otherwise have diplomatic representation in that particular country. So Canada, for instance, has honorary consuls in some countries where we don't have any missions, we don't have any offices. You know, we have an honorary consul. So that's what some countries have done here in Spain, or here rather in Barcelona, they have honorary consuls for local people. So there is right now a push in the body of the consular corps to say, look, those of us who are like-minded and who are here as diplomatic representatives from our countries, we should separate from the consular corps and we should form our own kind of professional body, and we should present our ideas to the local government, right? And the idea about joining the executive body, this is something that, you know, some of our colleagues are dealing with now, because the existing consular corps has approached members of the diplomatic representation in the city and said, would you like to join the executive committee? Right? So this is where this has come from. What would you do? If it were you, what would you do in real life? Go ahead.
So are you talking about to me?
Yeah, Sylvie. Yeah, Sylvie, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Well, you see, I work in development. So when I read the script, you know, obviously one of the assumptions I made is that, oh, I'm in a country where it's not a like-minded country, you know, because usually in development, well, we have very few of our governments that are very like-minded when we work in development. So,
yeah.
So I think this is what I guess my question is basically to, I'm not sure if I'm confirming or just making sure I understood properly, but when you were saying, you know, what are the assumptions that we're making? First of all, were you suggesting to actually put that in your answer? You know, like, okay, like in your situation, right? Like, so in the situation, you're basically saying, like, I'm making the assumptions here, ta, ta, ta. So in my case, if I want to take, you know, this example or these questions in the context of development, can I just say, well, given I'm working in development, I'm going to make the assumption here that I'm working with a government that was already not very like-minded, but now maybe the approach towards Canadian values have, you know,
gotten worse.
Radicalized, yeah, gotten worse. So, but it's would it be okay for me to say that, or even advisable for me to say that, or should I not?
It depends if that helps you. If that helps you answer the question from the perspective of a development officer, then go right ahead. You can assume that if you like. What I would say is that once you've made the assumption, though, you have to answer. You're stuck with it, right? You have to answer from that perspective. You can't at the later say, "Well, no, I assume that the government's really wonderful and loves us." No. You started off with that assumption. You're stuck with it for the whole question.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions there? Any other comments on the approach there? Any other clarification that people would like to make? What would you do if it were you in real life? Would you join the executive committee of the council? Go ahead, Gwen. And Amy, go ahead.
I already spoke, so Amy, if you want to go first.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so like in your situation, and I guess that can help probably build answers after. Does it help be part of the executive committee? Does it provide us different types of information? Does it extend our networks further?
That sounds like a marvelous answer to the second task, that question. Those would be the factors that you would consider. You know, you would say, well, in order to determine whether to be on this executive, I would consider different factors of how useful this is in terms of fulfilling my mandate, right? Could I guide the council to be more effective in order to further Canada's mandate? One other consideration might be whether it would help build alliances with others, which is also part of the mandate. So those are some of the factors that I would consider, right? How much influence would I have? That's another factor I would consider, right? That's what we bring out. That's exactly right.
Yeah. So the way I was thinking, if like we're established in a country that is much more like-minded than we probably already have, let's say different resources to get information or to advocate for things. And on the contrary, if we're in a country that we're much more limited, let's say, it will be probably a good option to go for it if, like you said, we can have some influence or we can benefit from it, I would say.
Sure. The other thing as well, remember that the last part of the question is who would you include in your discussions and your decision making, right? So you started out by saying that you're in a particular stream. Are there other members at the mission, at the Canadian mission, who would be affected by your decision here, right? Do you need to talk to them? Do you need to include them in your decision making? You know, do they need to be involved? Is it all about you and your program, or are there other programs that you advocate for that need that connection, or that would be better served by being on this new body, or that would be better served by you being on the executive? You know, those are factors as well, right?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Go ahead, Rasha.
Thanks so much, CJ. I think you know, everyone's points were really, really excellent. One thing I just wanted to add is, you know, something to consider is if it's possible to remain part of both bodies. I mean, in the question it says some foreign diplomatic counterparts have started to complain and that they're the ones who suggest it's better to abandon, but because they're abandoning doesn't necessarily mean we have to. Maybe we, you know, it's something for us to consider whether it would be good judgment to play and role in both bodies, and maybe they have served different functions, and to see there what our own view would be. But that's something I think we would want to consider.
Precisely so that would be a factor, right? One of the factors to consider is, do you have to choose one or the other, which is not clear from the question, right? And so then you would put that in as a factor to consider. Because again, the questions ask you what factors you would consider, right? It's not asking the answer, it would ask you what factors, right? So that would be a factor you'd bring in. Yes, any other questions or comments? All right, I think because it's in most people's business day, I think you have to run and do some of the rest of your work. You need to get on with it. If there are no further questions, if anybody has any further questions or comments, please, you know, raise your hand now and we'll discuss them. We are at the end of the session though, so those of you who need to leave, no problem, you can do it. You can do so. For tomorrow, it's whatever, you should have received a chart. You should have a chart with, you know, links. And so the links tell you what time the next sessions are, right? But the sessions, if I say a morning session, the morning sessions all happen at the same time. Afternoon sessions all happen at the same time. Evening sessions all happen at the same time. So anything that's an evening session is happening at this same time.
Oh, yes.
Go ahead,
CJ.
Yes, go ahead, Cedric.
Well, first and foremost, thank you so much. This is really, really excellent. I just want to clarify my last question. It was less about the times and more about the content. So for example, is the content for the first and the second going to be the same? Or like, should we just try to go to one? Or if we have time, should we try to go to both because the content will be different?
Oh, what do you mean? I'm sorry. Oh, the content of different sessions.
Well, so for example, tomorrow there's 2 sessions on the same day.
Oh,
are both sessions the same or are they different?
Well, I haven't decided.
All right, so if we,
I normally try to, yeah, I feel my way through, but I try to make it so it's a bit different each time, or so that people who would normally be at a morning session don't get the same thing at another morning session. You see what I mean? Because normally your participation is based on where you are. So if you can only come to, say, afternoon sessions, the afternoon sessions can't all be the same. They should be different, right?
I'll be there for both. Thank you so much, CJ. It's extremely helpful.
Okay, fantastic. Go ahead, Sylvie. You had a question or a comment?
Yes, thank you again. I feel I'm the only one talking actually in this group, so I should stop. But just to complement what Cedric just had mentioned, I've noticed that this session is recorded, and I missed the one yesterday, and tomorrow I will have to attend another meeting actually. So where can we find the recorded versions actually?
Sure, that's a good question. So those of you who have access to Teams, because you are in Global Affairs Canada, will be able to find this recording in MS Stream. And so you'd come into Teams and you would look in Stream and you look at available videos. And what I've done is I've made them open. But the thing is that Stream doesn't allow you to share videos outside of your organization, which is a big pain. So what I've started to do is to download these videos into YouTube, and in such a way that if I send you the link, then you can watch the video. You can't find the video unless you have the link, right? So that's how I'm going to make this these videos available to people.
Sorry, I believe that you actually well, not the invitation, but the information about these sessions were shared to me by a colleague of mine, because I'm not on Facebook. So how would you be, like, should I just get in touch with you to just, ask you, for those links on YouTube?
Yes, if you don't have any other way of finding the information, you can always email me and I'll send them to you. But of course, I'm going to be updating the document with the links in it to either Stream or YouTube. I'm going to be updating that document as we go along, right? So, obviously today's session is I have to upload it tonight. So if you want me to just send it to you, I can, but I'll also going to be updating in our different groups that we've seen. So people who are on Facebook in the different groups will be able to have access to that and see it. If you're outside of any of those groups and you don't have access, you can always just email me directly.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your generosity. Thank you.
Stephanie, go ahead.
Yes, hi CJ. Thank you so much for this session. My question relates to streams. So I think we had to select our stream as a preferred stream in this process. So how is that selection important through this process in answering the questions?
I don't think it has any impact at all on how you answer the question. It's up to you how you answer. If you have experience in a particular stream and you want to answer the questions from the perspective of that stream, you go right ahead. It doesn't really matter which stream you've selected, because they have to have answers or suggested answers that are broad enough to encompass everybody who's in the competition, right? So the one question that you get on, say, intercultural proficiency is going to be the same regardless if you're an MCO or if you're FPDS or if you're a trade officer or whatever, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? If you are afraid, how do you feel? How do people feel? You're all right. You feel scared. Who feels nervous? Nervous, yeah. Go ahead, Shariqua.
Oh, I was just raising my hand that I'm feeling nervous, but for the FS-01 that was last summer, these sessions really helped. So I felt a little bit less nervous going in, and so with these as well for this year, I'm extremely grateful, and I'm just going to try to do the same method as last time, but maybe start earlier, so I'm not trying to memorize everything at the last minute.
Indeed. The more you can prepare yourself, the more you can say, okay, you know what, it starts to become a part of you. And once it starts to become a part of you, you start to feel a bit more calm. And it's like, okay, I kind of know how this goes. All you're really showing is that you are a competent FS-02 officer, right? That's what you're showing. And that's why they ask you these questions from these different points of view. They're saying, okay, well, are you competent in this way? Are you competent in that way? Can you express yourself well in orally? Can you express yourself in writing? So a lot of the times the evaluators, they're very senior people in the department. And when they're looking at your answers, they're saying, is this somebody I'd want on my team? The way they approach this, is this somebody that I could see myself working with, right? Are they really approaching this the right way? Do they think clearly? Do they really have a good sense of what's being asked of them? Do they know when to ask for help? Do they know what resources are available to them? Do they know what, if I put a question to them, they didn't know what question is being asked of them? Do they answer the question that's being asked? Do they see things that are important to see? That's the kind of thing that they're looking for overall, right? Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, thanks for the session. I haven't seen the ones yesterday. yet, but I was hoping, and maybe in the future ones, to learn more, hear more about the writing part of the test. So I don't know if you have one plan, but I'll probably just, if I'm not following live, I'll watch them after.
Indeed. Yeah, we'll have to approach that one. It's going to be a bit of a challenge because, of course, this is a platform that's geared towards oral expression. But I'm thinking of how to do something written, but it's going to require, I think, some work from the people on the line because, you know, we can't have a written exercise unless people are prepared to actually write things down while they're here in the session, right?
Yeah. Okay. Well, maybe just even a sense of like what type of I don't know. I've had different experiences with other competitions in terms of it's a PowerPoint presentation, it's a briefing note, it's different things. So
yeah, it depends what format they give you. Actually, those people who did the writing exercise before, was it just answering a particular question? Was it in the, you know, prepare a briefing note, or what was the format?
So for the FS1, it was just use an example from a prior work experience and evaluated. I think it was like, how did you face a difficult situation or make a difficult decision based on time constraints, something like that. And so I just used the STAR method and answered the question and explained my steps. There was no like briefing note or anything, but that's FS1 and this is FS2, so don't know. Could be different.
Indeed. Sylvie, what was your experience?
Yes, I did a competition. I can't remember what for again, but it was 2 or 3 years ago, and the exam was 4 hours long, and there were 3 questions. I cannot recall. The great advantage for that competition is that they allowed us to write into a Word document and then import it afterwards. So yes, in that case, we did have obviously like the grammar and the corrector embedded in the Word document. But also at that time, and I'm not sure if this was if this had changed in the vidcruiter, but at that time, vidcruiter did not count words. So it was difficult. And actually, in the French version, because I did it in French, in the French version, we had a certain limited amount of words we could put. And in French, you know, like by law, we have like I think it's 15% more
like
words than in English.
More. Yeah.
And but vidcruiter company had forgotten about this, about amending it. So at the very last minute, I cannot remember, you know, per question how it was, but at the very last minute, and again, like this is like after 4 hours or like 3 hours and like 45 minutes, when us, like the francophone or the people who chose to answer in French, when we wanted to import it, it wouldn't allow, like it wouldn't paste, and we were panicking because we couldn't understand why. And because, you know, when you look on Word and you do the word count, it did say that I was entering whatever the word count I had. So that was a very panicking moment because at the very last minute, like you basically, like I wanted to take the last 15 minutes to just, you know, take a deep breath, read them through. I was pretty confident that I had a sound answer, but I just want to read through, just look for grammar mistakes. And at the last minute, it's like, oh my God, I have to cut a whole paragraph. And I cannot do that. So I have to cut sentences here and there. So that was the panicking moment. But otherwise, in my case, it was 3 questions, 4 hours, which I don't like. It's obviously not the case in this competition. Yes, we could import. In this case, we cannot import from a Word document, which is sad. So I'm actually not quite sure myself what to expect, although I had a previous experience. If I recall, at that time, there was no corrector in the vidcruiter either, but I believe somebody had said that, yes, there is one now, so maybe that's an improvement. And as for the questions, again, I'm not, I believe there was one where it said, you know, choose one of the main priorities and explain like 3 things about this priority. Another question was, you know, you have to write a briefing note on this topic, like, you know, write a briefing note of, you know, a certain amount of words. And I cannot recall the last questions, unfortunately. So be prepared to any surprise. Really.
Pretty much. All right. So if there are further questions or comments, please pose them now. Otherwise, we'll draw this session to a close.
CJ, can you kindly share the document with the competency definitions?
Yes, let's see if
do
I
that.
can manage that right now. Let's see. If I can
Thanks
do
so
it, I will
much.
do it right now. Let's see.
CJ, I have a question about these streams as well that you mentioned you'd be able to upload the videos. I checked MS Teams streams, and my watch list is completely empty, so I'm not sure if I'm doing something wrong.
Your watch list is empty. Look at the top right corner. It says stream.
Yes.
Click there.
Okay, and that takes me to a website.
Yeah. So it takes you to the stream site, and then you want to see, you know, all videos, or you'll see that there's a search box at the top. Yes.
Yes. Yes.
You
I
put
can
in
search for you.
FS-02.
Okay. Fantastic. Thank you so much.
There you go. So the C2 are already there.
Yeah, I see your morning session, your afternoon session. Great.
Yes. Yes. So those are there already. And the
And
YouTube
sorry
ones
to
are-
interrupt. You were going to
No, that's
upload the
perfect.
document.
I'm not as good at this as I thought I was. I don't even know how to add these files, unfortunately. What I'll do then is upload them another way. I'll figure out a way how to upload them. Perhaps to actually stream and to the YouTube video. Maybe I'll find a way to do that, or I'll attach it in a future document, or I'll email it up to people. How about that?
Great.
I think you should
I'll
be able
find a way to
to
get it to you. I'll find a way to get it to you.
to drag and drop, like if drag and drop in the type new message section. That tends to work for me, but I understand it can be tricky sometimes as well.
Okay, let me see if I can do that right now, and I'll do it. Does it work? No, it's giving me this. No, it won't let me do it. Hold on. Yeah, it doesn't let me do it for some reason. It could just be my I'm working off a laptop here, and it could just be that it doesn't like it. Whereas if I were working off a desktop, maybe it would work. I'm not sure. That's really unfortunate. And then on top of that, we're not even sure if these are actually the competency definitions that are going to be used for the competition. That's the other thing that makes no sense. Unfortunately, sad to say. I'll try one more time, and if that doesn't work, then forget it. Yeah, it's not working for some reason. Okay, I'm not as good at this as I thought. Okay. Anything else at the moment? I'll sort out the document later on. Thanks for trying. Participation trophy. Anything else? If not, then I'll bid you all good afternoon, good evening, and we'll see you in another session. Take care, everybody. You're welcome. Take care.
CJ, would you mind just staying on the line? I just had one quick question while I have
No
you on the
problem.
line.
I'll end the recording.
Okay, perfect. I'll just wait till everyone leaves.